Welcome to the Fran Snyder Podcast, where I talk to artists and music fans to explore how music connects us through great stories and experiences. Brought to you by the Listening Room Network. Today's guest, Candelaria. Great to see you. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. It's a great day.
Yeah, it's nice to chat with you. You are in Fort Myers, Florida. I know you've had an interesting story leading you around the country and eventually to Fort Myers. So let's start a little bit with what you're doing now, and then we'll backtrack to some of your cool stories of how the music business was when you were first starting out. How does that sound?
That sounds good.
Okay, so what are you up to in Fort Myers?
Well, I sing with Smokey Daytona and the Floridians, and we do a lot of charity gigs in libraries and hospitals and things like that. It's just fun, and at times they pay us, but we don't need the money, so we just donate it to whatever.
Oh, that's great.
It's fun. It's a fun thing to keep your chops up a little bit.
That's great. So you and I connected through the Americana Community Music Association.
That's right.
We call it the ACMa. And so tell me a little bit about how you discovered them and sort of what you feel they're most positively contributing to the music scene in Fort Myers.
Well, I noticed that one of my friends from California was Doug MacLeod, was playing at the ACMa, and I knew him from the South Bay, from Redondo Beach and all that area. He played that area, and that's where he's from. So I knew him. I said, "Wow, I got to go see an old friend." So I checked him out, but then I checked out the Americana Community Music Association, and I said, "Man, I found myself a home. I like these people. They're just so supportive of people that want to be in the industry, that want to write, that want to perform, and just do it because they like it." And that's such a good thing. And everybody listens. There's no noise, nobody clinking glasses trying to talk over what you're doing or whatever. So it really is good. It is exactly what it should be. It's a listening room.
Awesome. And so all right, so let's backtrack to Redondo Beach. Is that where it all started for you in terms of music? Where did you grow up first, and tell me about the early days of the music business for you?
You know how they will tell you that it's better to be lucky than good?
Yeah.
It's the absolute truth. I was born in Colorado, and had my parents not moved to California, none of this would have ever happened. It couldn't have. It just wouldn't have. And then through a bunch of flukes, we lived in pretty much downtown Los Angeles. And then through flukes, my dad worked for Lockheed Aircraft. They transferred him. It was too far to drive. There weren't freeways then. So they transferred him. We moved. Then they transferred him back. And he said, "Oh, let's look for something in the San Fernando Valley." Well, we moved there when I was 13 years old. I was in ninth grade. And it just happened to be that this was like the opening of everything good that could happen in music happening there. Now you had all the Philly stuff, and you had, New York, but Philly was the big place back there, singing on the stoop and all the boys doing that.
So are we talking about the 50s or early 60s here?
Well, actually, for me, it started out about in 1956, 57.
Okay.
We got our first record contract when I was 17.
Wow.
Darren he's the second tenor in the group. We're a trio. He didn't even have a driver's license yet. I had to pick him up and drive him to a recording session. And the guy that signed us to our first contract was Herb Alpert. And he was an independent producer at the time, and he produced for Andex Records. And he and Lou Adler were producing people like Sam Cooke and people like that. And but he was an independent producer. He didn't own A&M. A&M wasn't even a dream yet.
Right.
And then, so he signed us to Andex, and then, I don't know, he got in some kind of a a beef with them. One of those where he wanted more control. They didn't want to give it to him, whatever. He left. So they weren't going to promote anybody that he signed to the label. So we died on the label. And after,
it's heartwarming to hear that was happening back then too, because that is a tradition that has survived many a decade. Is you get signed to a label, and then the key person that was your champion moves on, and then you just wither on the vine, right?
And they won't release you from a contract,
right?
But they won't. So they don't let you go. So all the while you're champing to be, because you know that the person that signed you to the label would probably sign you to another label, but they won't let you go to do that. So at that time we were doing things like Alpert lived in Laurel Canyon. And Laurel Canyon, from where I lived a block off Laurel Canyon in the San Fernando Valley, but that was about 8 miles from where Herb lived.
Now hang on a second. I'm confused. When you say San Fernando Valley, I think like northeast of LA, right? And Laurel Canyon was closer to Hollywood.
Well, it's northwest of LA proper, not northeast, northwest.
Okay.
And Laurel Canyon is a street. It's Laurel Canyon Boulevard, and it runs all the way from San Fernando all the way down into Hollywood, where it becomes Crescent Heights.
So Laurel Canyon goes all the way to San Fernando.
It actually was a canyon.
Okay.
It's a canyon that runs right through the Hollywood Hills.
Okay.
And that's where a lot of the action was happening then and later. It was just a nice place to live.
Got it.
But we would go and practice at Herb's house, and it was kind of a funny hit situation. But in those days, you could talk to record company executives. You could get in to see people. And the thing is that most of the people that would record you and would sign you and everything were also artists. So they had a feel for the music. But Herb left, and then he started a company with Lou Adler called Herbie Lou Productions. And Herbie Lou Productions was on Sunset Boulevard, naturally right over Laurel Canyon, dropped down in Sunset. It was a little bit to the right. And we'd go practice there and everything. But things were moving really, really slowly. And we got an offer to talking to another group, and they said, why don't you go see Gary Paxton and Kim Fowley? Now, who's Gary Paxton and Kim Fowley? Kim Fowley ended up producing all the girl groups, the Runaways and people like that. But Gary was Flip from Skip and Flip, but he was also the leader of the Hollywood Argyles. And the Hollywood Argyles was a group that was composed of other individuals from other groups. Marshall Lieb from the Teddy Bears, Derry Weaver, and little Bobby Ray, all these people that we used to hang out. And excuse me, Dallas Frazier was the one who had written LEU. And we would sit around and have these talks. We would talk until 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning. Excuse me. It was kind of like, I envisioned it kind of like the painters that used to gather on the left bank in Paris and talk until we are morning, drinking wine or whatever and discussing art. Well, Dallas Frazier had written LEU. Well, he went on to write Elvira.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and you're talking about multi-million selling records.
Sure.
We're sitting there one night, and I asked him, he said, well, I got to leave early. I said, why are you doing that? And he goes, well, I want to go to BMI in the morning and get an advance. And I said, an advance? What kind of advance? He says, oh, probably around 10,000. I want to buy a new Cadillac. And I'm going, what? I'm like 18 years old. $10,000 is probably what the average working stiff makes in 2 years.
Right.
So, for him to say, well, I'm just going to get an advance and blow out, and I'm going, right. It was funny. We'd talk about everything. I said, Dallas, how do you write? How do you write hits. And he goes, oh, he says, I'm always looking for a hook.
Yeah.
And I said,
Yeah.
a hook and that's it, huh? And he
Yeah.
goes, oh yeah. He says, I've only written 2 songs that really mean. One is Feet Are Ugly, and the other one is I Like Ears. And we'll just sit around and talk though, but you're talking to musicians who are in everything, and everything's going on. But it was crazy. Look, the Innocents, that was the name of the group that I recorded with, but we were a car club. But we were a car club of kids that didn't have a lot of money, so we didn't go for the really cool fancy cars. We were into music, and out of the car club, we had a band, and the band was called the Emeralds. Well, Darren was our second tenor, and he played guitar, but he sang. We sing with the club, with the group, but Larry Tamblyn played guitar. Larry Tamblyn was Russ Tamblyn's little brother, who played opposite Natalie Wood in West Side Story.
Yeah.
And
I want to highlight sort of a difference between now and then. And you're talking about a band that has a second tenor. Like, when was the last time that you heard of a band that has a second tenor? That's how drastically things have changed in the world of music, right?
Well, the thing is look, we had Larry Tamblyn, who's Russ Tamblyn's little brother, playing lead guitar and singing vocals, who went on to sing with the Standells. And he's still with them, and he plays keyboards now for them. Wayne Edwards was the drummer in the band. He went on to play with the Hondells. And, there were various members. One of the guys, Freddie Pirro, he wasn't particularly musically talented, but he loved music. So what did he do? He built a studio. The studio is called Mama Joe's, and he recorded people like Ambrosia and John Clemmer and people of this nature. So this was happening, and it was just a few miles from Hollywood.
It almost seems like it was impossible not to be in the music business where you lived. I mean, you went to high school. Was it Richie Valens that was in your high school, or?
Well, no, I went to San Fernando Senior High, but then they opened a high school 6 blocks from my house. I didn't have a car, so guess what? My folks said, you're going there. And I said, oh, okay. So I went to Poly. But the other thing is there were 2 feeder schools that went into San Fernando High School, Sun Valley Junior High School and Pacoima Junior High School. Well, Richie Valens went to Pacoima, and he was a neighbor. We'd run into him at parties. This was just what was happening. And there were, it was happening all over the place.
Yeah. Did you watch? What's the recent movie about Laurel Canyon? Echoes in the Canyon. Have you seen that yet?
I've seen it. Yeah, I've seen it. It was interesting. It was a little bit later. They pointed out a lot of stuff. Brian Wilson from the Beach Boys. He's pretty awesome. Yeah. Awesome in the way that he thought and composed his music. Of course, you had to be able to do what he said, but we were good at what we did. We did 4 or 5 albums, but we did everybody's background. And as they say, hey, get the Innocents to do it. They'll do anything.
Yeah. That's funny. If you are enjoying this podcast, can you pause for a moment to like, review, and subscribe? Please help the world discover our music community and the wonderful artists we support. Your feedback makes a difference. So I'm curious, because you opened for a lot of acts and got exposed to some pretty noteworthy folks. Of the people that you opened for or shared stages with, who was most different than their on-stage persona? Like, who had the biggest sort of night and day change from how they were off stage to on stage?
Probably Little Richard.
Yeah.
He was the nicest person you'd ever want to meet. He was just a genuinely nice person. The last time I saw him, he said, "I'm going, Al, I've got to get a hip replacement." And
Yeah.
I looked at him kind of startled. He says, "Oh, don't worry, man." He says, "I'm going to be back. I'm going to be back.
Yeah.
We'll be together. Don't worry. I'll be back." And then he didn't come back because I guess it was a little more traumatic. He also didn't die for quite a while, but he wasn't on the road performing like he was before.
What was he a little more mellow off stage? Because on stage he always looked like he was about to bust at the seams.
Well, that was it. See, he was like that, but off stage, he he was just like the nicest person you ever met, who was not hyper, not like that. He was a Seventh Day Adventist preacher. He
Yeah.
was ordained, and he was funny. He would make jokes about himself, and he was just a genuinely nice person. A lot of people were like that. I mean, I played with Chubby Checker and with Chuck Berry and people like that. They all had their own offstage personas,
Mhm.
and back in those days, we really didn't do so much opening acts. It was sharing a stage, and it
Just a
might be
a lineup of bands, right? In no particular order. Just it wasn't like this is the opening act, this is the main act. You just have a whole slew of artists, right?
well, I wrote down one lineup that we did just so that I could tell you what it was.
Yeah.
We did a show that was called The Legends of Rock and Roll, and it had the Cascades of John Trees, Frankie Ford, the Marvelettes, Freddie Canyon, Roy Head, Jimmy Jones, the Chiffons, Bruce Chanel, Lenny Welch, and Kathy Young, and us.
Yeah.
That was one show.
Did you tour overseas at all, or was it all in the U.S.?
We all did the U.S.
Yeah.
We were here all the time. I had other people that did it and really liked it. Chris Montez was a friend, and he was the last person in England to have a #1 song before the Beatles hit. And he was touring with the Beatles, and he came back with some crazy stories. But it is what it is. I mean, and things change so much. I mean, to tell you what it was like, being able to work with people that were in the business, that were well-formed, that understood it, was really great. And they gave us great advice that we never followed.
Yeah.
You're a kid.
So you're going into the studio and on the road as a kid. Like, do you remember your first time in a recording studio? Were you intimidated? Did it just kind of feel natural, or?
I was so intimidated, you couldn't believe it. We went in to back a young lady, and they just said, well, would you want to do some background for a singer that's auditioning for a contract? We said, oh, sure. And they said, have you ever been in a studio? And we said, no. And they said, oh, this would be a great experience for you. Well, we got a contract, and she didn't.
Oh.
And that was when we signed with Herb Alpert.
Yeah.
And it's serendipity. It's flukes. If this happens, that happens. This door opens, that door opens.
What did you feel about the work ethic in those days? Like, looking back, because you got to see a lot, you got to see several decades worth of performers. And I'm curious, like, do you feel that people over-prepared back then, musicians over-prepared compared to now? Or was it just like, the talented people just showed up and it didn't require that much effort? They were just the kind of people who were dialed in and didn't really woodshed like you would think.
Back in those days, almost invariably you were provided with a house band that played for everybody, but they had your charts and they just did the work. And I was just a vocalist, so I'd go and sing. On the road, I played guitar, but that wasn't what we did. We went up there, we were vocalists. We were a trio that sang. So we'd go up and we'd do our number, but that was pretty much how it was. In the studios, it was totally different, because in the studios, we worked a lot with the Wrecking Crew.
Yeah.
Glenn Campbell, Carol Kay, Red Callender, Earl Palmer, Hal Blaine. At that time, Hal Blaine and Earl Palmer were paying on 75% of all the records.
Yeah, who was it? Was it Denny Tedesco a few years ago who did a sort of retrospective on the Wrecking Crew? Did you see that movie?
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah.
These are all people I knew. And
Yeah.
people say, well, what was it like being with them? I said, they were incredibly talented musicians, but you want to know something? They played with each other 2 or 3 times a week. They played with us once or twice a year. I said, they talk to each other. They didn't even talk to us.
Right.
Other than to say, okay, here, we're going to do this. What's this? And you were almost better off to tell them, what do you think? And let them go, because they were so talented that, giving them instructions didn't work. I mean, they were much better than we were.
Yeah.
And I worked with a lot of people. I worked with, let's see, when I went to A&M, we used, what's his name from Bread? Tommy LaPuma, producers like that, who went on to produce people like Diana Krall.
Yeah.
I mean, it's phenomenal to work with people. When you write a song, you give it to them, they bring you back an arrangement, you go, wow, I wrote that.
Yeah. Of all the people that you met, who do you feel had the biggest impact on you? Either just from something you learned, or sort of an impression that they made?
If I would have listened, it would have been my earliest days with the Hollywood Argyles, working with these guys, because you were working with some of the people that they already had number one singles and multi-million selling songs and stuff like this, and they just gave us good advice. And I remember talking to them about songwriting, and they said, oh, look, you're going to write songs, and you're writing songs already, but okay, a girl's name. If you write a song for a girl's name, every girl with that name is going to buy that song. Second thing is, write songs for girls between the ages of 11 and 15.
Yeah.
And I said, 11 and 15? They said, yeah, because 11 years old to 50 years old, if they got $1 and you got a record that costs $1, they can spend that $1. But after 15, they're getting into cars and gasoline. And then older, does a baby need shoes? Does a car need tires?
Yeah.
It says everything is divided. Before that, it says that's the ultimate. Now, you look at Taylor Swift, and she did her song, You Belong to Me. She wrote exactly what they told us to do and didn't.
Yeah.
And what did she get? That song, what is it? It's got 1.1 billion views on YouTube. That's crazy.
That's awesome. Well, Al, it's been a real pleasure chatting with you, and definitely hope we can visit next time I'm down in Fort Myers. Please say hello to all the kind folks.
Come and check out the ACMA. I'm always there. I'm a roadie there. I'm the best audience you can get.
Awesome. All right, Al, have a great day, and we'll talk again soon.
And to you. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Fran Snyder Podcast. Please subscribe, like, or share to help your friends discover this community. Also, I'd love to hear from you with any feedback or suggestions you have. And if you'd like to learn more about house concerts and listening rooms around the world, please visit and join listeningroomnetwork.com. You can email me from there. See you next time on the Fran Snyder Podcast.